in spending this extra gifted hour that we all have, spending it together. We want to change more than just our clocks. We want to change our lives. This Suda, this time, as Shabbos is concluded, is called the Malava Malka, the escorting of the queen. And of course, we ask the obvious question. The Shabbos queen has seemingly already left. Why are we still holding on and saying that the queen is with us? The Shabbos queen is gone. And so the answer is that just as we would linger as long as we possibly can with a dear friend or with a special occurrence, so too we hold dearly to Shabbos Kodesh in the hopes of gleaning just a few more special moments. There is a custom, as we mentioned, to eat a meal at this time to help escort the queen. And the Beis Yosef, one of our great sages, Rav Yosef Cairo, the author of what we refer to as the Shulchan Aruch, he is also the author of a commentary on the Torah Shulchan Aruch called the Beis Yosef. He comments there that there is a certain limb or bone in the body that only receives its nourishment from the food eaten on Motzoi Shabbos. It is called the luz bone. And the concept is that this luz bone is the beginning of the rebuilding of the body in the time of Tchias HaMesim, may it be speedily in our days. We know, of course, that when God created the worlds, we read just a few weeks ago in Bereshis, on the very first day, that first Friday, there was terrible failure and collapse. But the luz bone remains pure. It is not nourished by the food eaten by Adam and Chava on that first Friday. Rather, it's only nourished from this food, the food eaten Motzoi Shabbos. And as such, it remains isolated, insulated, and innocent of that first sin, that first failure. And that's why it retains the initial eternal life that was to be imprinted upon all of creation. And therefore, it is the source for the rebuilding of the body in the time of Tchias HaMesim. Chassidus asks the seemingly obvious question: why does the luz bone require any nourishment? Since it is of such holiness and sanctity, why is it dependent upon nourishment from anything of this world? And so we answer that it is associated with another custom that we know of on this time of Motzoi Shabbos, which is to share stories of the Baal Shem Tov. We know that the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidus, came not to isolate us from the world, but rather to bring Kedusha into the world, into our ordinary activities. In a similar manner, on Motzoi Shabbos, the luz bone reminds us that the world does not stand in conflict with godliness. On the contrary, the world and practices such as eating, the necessities of physical sustenance, are not antithetical to godliness. On the contrary, they are in perfect concert with godliness when they are utilized properly. Similarly, all material things, look at the gift we are all enjoying now of Zoom, of technology. It could be used in the service of self, it could be used in the wasting of tons of time, or it could be used to transmit Torah as we are doing. And in this similar manner, the luz bone reminds us that we are not to be detached from the world. We are to be very careful in how we monitor the world and the manner in which we interact with the world. We're going to be hearing from our very special guest, who we are so grateful to, Rav Yisrael Starck. We are so grateful that he has joined us to share his story. It's a story that takes us back to a time when it seems that the world stands in absolute conflict with godliness. And yet, it is a time of celebration. It is a message of inspiration. It is a message of the gift of life and the gift that keeps on giving with a person who has chosen life, as Torah tells us, and has brought that life into the world. So we are so grateful to be with him tonight. So pour yourself a hot drink, light a candle, have some soothing hot tea on this Motzoi Shabbos. And we are dedicating all of our special event here to the refuah shlema of all those who need it, and the ultimate refuah shlema, an end to this virus, the virus called Golas. If you would like to ask Rabbi Yisrael a question, you can put it in the chat to me, and we will be respectful of his time. And at the end, we'll do our best to address the questions. We want to again thank him so much. We want to thank Rabbi and Mrs. Rappaport, whose idea this was and put it together and created the flyer and the Zoom. And we want to thank each of you for being who you are and adding your special part to this special evening. So let us listen closely. Let us not sit back and relax, but sit forward and be inspired and uplifted. And let us make sure that as we change our clocks, we change our lives for good. So Rabbi Yisrael Starck, thank you so much for joining us. Please, everybody, make sure you're on mute so we don't get any background noise, but put on your video so we can see you. And let's share this story tonight, the story of our modern day tzaddikim. And in this way, we will be invigorated with that loose bone. And we will demonstrate that the world is not in conflict with godliness, but it is an opportunity for the expression of godliness. A good davach, Rabbi Yisrael, please, we grant you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Liu. A gute Woche and a gesunde Woche and a mazelige Woche and a freiliche Woche and a parnussedike Woche to everybody. I'm really. Can everybody hear me all right? Very good. I'm really sorry that I could not join you in person. It would be a different, under different situation and so forth. But nevertheless, at least we have this possibility to at least meet this way. And I would like to thank Rabbi Liu again for the wonderful, I listened to the wonderful edition of the meaning of the custom of Lava Malka. And I have been, I remember when I was a little boy, I used to attend many times Lava Malka of some of the Rabbonim in the city of Munkach, where I come from. So I am here this evening. I would like to speak to you about not a very pleasant, a very pleasant talk, but nevertheless, I think it is necessary. It is necessary for you to remember, to remember about the Churban Europe and about our Kedoshim, the Toirim that lost their lives in that time. I would like to speak to you tonight about my experiences during those days, the days of the Churban itself, and I experienced 4 different concentration camps, which I'm going to mention to you their names and so forth. And I'm sure that many of you have heard about these particular concentration camps already. I'd like to first of all to mention that unfortunately we have a situation where we say poichis v'hoilech. It is constantly, every day, unfortunately, less and less survivors, so-called survivors from the Shoah or from the Churban Europe. They can really get up and speak to you about experiences that happened to me. I'm not going to tell you something that happened that I've heard from my grandfather, I've heard from my friend. What I'm going to tell you is something that I experienced myself. There was many years ago, there was a whole group of the Sheres HaPleita, which included, Sheres HaPleita means the remnants of the afflicted, or the ones that survived. In those days, we invited Rabbi Lau, who was the Rabbi Roshi in Eretz Yisrael, to come to speak at this particular banquet. And if I remember correctly, this was also the first time that the banquet was mixed with I would say non-religious and religious, and they have finally agreed that this banquet is going to be certainly kosher, which didn't happen before that. So I remember something that Rabbi Lau said at that time, which left a remark to me, which I many times I repeat. And he said that it is time to stop talking how our brothers and sisters and friends and grandfathers, how they perished during the war. It's time to talk, and it's time to recite how they lived during the war. Not how they lived, of course, in Warsaw and and in Munkac and Khust and many of the other great locations where many Jews were gathered, and there were some tremendous Jews in those cities. But how did they live during the Chorm Europe? How did they live during the worst of time? And this is what I'm going to touch on, and this is what I'm going to speak to you about tonight. I want to tell you, first of all, a little bit about my background. Again, my name is Yisroel Starck, as Rabbi Leo mentioned. I have been speaking about my experiences for many years to many Moises HaTorah, children of all ages in many different schools, in many different Moises HaTorah in many different cities. I also have to tell you that I've spoken not only to religious organizations, interreligious groups, but many times, and I'm still have on my list invitations from non-religious schools and non-religious educational, but I mean non-religious is actually Gentile schools and their colleges and so forth and groups who have many times invited me to speak to them also. And it seems to me that there is a tremendous, in the last, especially in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, it is an awakening that we have to speak about these Chorm Europe, and we have to remember. There's a mitzvah asay medoraisa. There is a mitzvah asay means a positive commandment from the Torah to the choir that you have to remember ma'uselechu amolek, not only on Purim time, and when we Parsha Zuchar, when we read Parsha Zuchar, but it's a mitzvah to say to remember every day, Ma'usel Chamolak. And certainly, my friends, in my opinion, it is certainly worthwhile to remember and to tell your children, not only on Pesach time, but also tell your children all the time about Churm Europe, what happened to their great grandfathers and brothers and sisters. So I am fulfilling that part of my need, and I'm speaking him as long as the Rebbeinu Shalom will give me strength and years to continue, I will be doing so because I personally feel. And I also must mention to you that as I mentioned in the last 5-10 years, there has been a reawakening because unfortunately, many of the real Hasidische Moisdes did not stress the need to educate the future generations about Churm Europe. But nevertheless, I remember the Novominsker Rebbe Zal, who in the last 5 years, whenever I heard him start speaking for any group or any time, and he almost spoke weekly or maybe sometimes a few times weekly, and he always started with the same theme as a choir. It is a duty for us to remember what happened in Churm Europe. So give you a little bit of my background. I come from a city called Munkac, or in Ukrainian it's Munkachevo. During my time, while I was born till end of 1939, we were under we were governed by the Czechoslovakian Republic. And of course, I was a little boy and went to Cheder, but there was also, I think, a law that every child, let's say up to 14, had to attend public school. So till the end of the 1939, right, I attended Czech schools, and of course, we were occupied by the Hungarian government in beginning of 1940. And of course, we had to again shift over to new language and new education. Most of the older Jews in that I remember, including my grandparents and so forth, spoke Hungarian already, because this territory that I'm talking about, which now belongs to Ukraine, belonged to Hungary before around World War I. And after World War I, it was reverted to Czechoslovakia. And after World War II, it was reverted to Russia, and it's now part of Ukraine. So this is I come from a Hasidic family. My father, Oliver Sholem, was a Belzer Chassid. My great-grandparents were Belzer Hasidim and so forth. So basically, I grew up under the, I would say, the influence of this Hasidus of Belz. And also, I went to the cheder that I went to for starting from the age of 4 or 5, whenever we started learning Chumash, was also in Belzer Moisdois. Now, again, when I reached the age of 14 years old, which was 1944. And as I said, we were already under the Hungarian government on their governorship, and they made a contract, or I should say, a deal with the German. With the German regime, with the Reich or Hitler himself, that they are not going to be physically occupied by the Germans, by the Russian, like Poland was occupied in beginning of 1940, and also Czechoslovakia was occupied by the German forces. But Hungary is not going to be occupied, but nevertheless, they have to promise that they will toe their line, so to speak. They will be in their camp, and they have to know that they're also giving difficulty to the Jews that lived at that time in Hungary. And of course, they certainly obeyed. They immediately, I would say, discontinued, or they took away all licenses from professionals, from Jewish professionals in Hungary, of course, doctors, lawyers, and so forth and so on, and even businesses that needed a license, a proper city license or a license from the government. All was taken away, and of course we were existing on our own. Usually, I would say by nissim and influence, we managed to get along, even though Parnasa was taken away from all of the Jews. But nevertheless, there's one thing which I must stress: that in spite of all the difficulty that the Hungarian government agreed to carry out the edicts of the Roshim, of the German Roshim, nevertheless, we were still going to sleep every night in our own beds in our own home, which was the most important part, which did not happen in of course, in Poland and in many other parts of Eastern Europe. We know now that the minute the Germans occupied many of these territories, the Jews were immediately transported away, and you know where they were transported to. So we were not touched. Even though we were occupied by Hungary in the beginning of 1940, but we were not touched, and we were not taken away from our home till 1944. In the beginning of 1944, approximately around April, March, or end of March or April, which I would say takes us to around Pesach time. Suddenly, I would say I must mention also that the Pesach at that time, the last Pesach that I remember at home, while my father was conducting the Seder and so forth, we had in a adjacent room where my father was conducting the Seder, 2 German officers came and said they will occupy that room for the time being. So while he conducted the Seder, there was already 2 Roshim next to our door. But nevertheless, we went through the Seder, the minhag, like we used to, with all the things that we required for the Seder and so forth. But at the end of Pesach and Shvi Shal Pesach, there was a knock in the door in the morning. We did not yet put away, there was Achron Shal Pesach, I'm sorry, not Shvi Shal Pesach, Achron Shal Pesach. We did not even put away our Pesach the Keddishes, and we did not even have any hummus in our apartment. There was a knock on the door that morning, and my parents opened the door, and there were two Hungarian gendarmes officers and one German officer standing there, and they gave us the following edict, the following seal. You have 1 hour to pack, and take whatever you can carry with you. Rabbi Isai, what if God forbid somebody is commanded to has 1 hour to pack, and in the back of the mind we have the knowledge that we have to leave our homes, and who knows probably whether we will ever return back to our homes. So what do you pack? There was still no, as I mentioned, there was still no hummus or food of any kind to pack. So my mother didn't have any fancy suitcases, so she opened up a bed sheet and started pulling in articles of clothing and so forth in that bundle, and she tied it up. And of course, we left the house, and we were told to gather together in the backyard of the shul that we used to daven. My parents and me were davening there. That was our regular shul in Pot Horian, which was a suburb of Munkash. And we all showed up at that backyard with the bundle that carried and so forth. So basically, I also mentioned, I did mention to you that I was a Ben Yochid. I was the only boy. I did have 3 sisters, and of one that passed away while we were still at home. 2 of my sisters who were older than me, I was the youngest. 2 of my sisters decided when they heard the tzibur, when they heard that we have to pack and leave in 1 hour, so they ran out from through the back window of the house, and they decided, the 2 sisters, that they are going to run away. They are not going to join in the backyard of the shul where we were commanded. Of course, as we showed up there, my mother was very distraught, and both my parents very distraught, because they didn't see my sisters. They didn't know what happened to them. But after a while we were standing around and waiting for the next move, my sisters did show up, and I saw them from a distance approaching, and I told my parents, look, my sisters are coming. And they told my parents that there was no place to go, there was no place to hide, there was nobody to help. So consequently, of course, they had a good idea, maybe to escape, but it didn't make any sense to them, because nobody would ever, nobody lifted a finger to help them, to hide them. So we were all intact now, and approximately, I would say, after about 4 or 5 hours, they marched us off to a so-called ghetto. The ghetto was near Munkash, and it was a brick factory. I used brick factory, but they used to cinder or they used to burn bricks for buildings. And the reason, of course, one of the reasons the Germans picked this particular place as the temporary ghetto is because it had also a platform where the trains moved right into this factory. And of course, eventually they knew that they will have to all put us on these boxcars and move us out, so they don't have to move us to another place to do so. Sure enough, I don't know, after I don't know how many days in that temporary ghetto, maybe 4 or 5 days, the train, the empty boxcars moved in, and they loaded us up, telling us that we don't have to worry, we don't have to be was concerned because they are taking us to some Hungarian farms to do some work, and families would stay together. That was the whole spiel that they gave us while we were boarding those boxcars. Of course, we did not believe them, and soon enough, as the train started moving, every boxcar had like a little triangular window, and since I was a little boy, they lifted me up and they said, "Srulik, put out your head through this boxcar," because when the train approached a bigger city like Košice or other cities, larger cities, the train slowed down. And slowing down, I had the chance to see the sign, which station, the sign of the station or the city that we are passing. And I mentioned the name to the people in the boxcar. And pretty soon I saw their faces never that most of them finally were aware that we are not moving to some Hungarian farms to do some work, but we are moving towards Auschwitz. Soon enough, I don't know whether it was 2 days or more than 2 days. Soon enough, the train slowed down. Now we felt it slowed down, coming to an end of the journey. And again, they told me they lifted me up to put out my head through the rectangular window. And they asked me, "What do you see now, Srulik?" And I described the scenery that I noticed. And I said, "There's a big platform here, a wooden platform loaded with all kinds of baggage, of suitcases and bundles. And I think there is a sign that I see, Arbeit macht frei, work makes you free." And I have given that information. Pretty soon this train came to a total halt. And suddenly the sound of opening the sliding doors of these boxcars, which were filled to the gills with men, women, and children, to such a point where anybody that stood up didn't have a chance to sit down, and anybody that was sitting down in the bundle couldn't stand up. It was so packed. So the command that was vibrating all over was "Aussteigen." Everybody to disembark from those empty cars. Of course, as the word "Aussteigen" was heard, people started to get off. My sisters, of course, were included. But my mother motioned to me, "Don't get off yet. Wait, wait." And my father also waited. Pretty soon, my friends, I looked around and there were 3 people standing in the empty boxcar. There was my father, my mother who opened up her bundle that she packed. And also my father was holding my tefillin in his hands, and myself. And my mother called me over to near the bundle, and he started putting on different articles of clothing on me. And I did ask her, I says, "Mother, why are you putting on all this clothing on me?" She says, "Well, don't you see the platform? We have to leave everything here. I cannot take the bundle with me or so far. So maybe, just maybe the clothing that you have on the person, you'll be able to keep." And soon enough, my father handed me the film and says, "Srulik, keep that film as long as possible." And while this was going on, a young man that I, approximately the age of 20, of 21, a young man in the stripes who was a prisoner also, he was one of the prisoners in Auschwitz. His duty was he was in charge of the arrival of these transports and to make sure that everybody emptied out the freight cars as soon as possible and that everybody lined up to be marched away. As he passed by our empty freight car, he noticed that the 3 of us were still there. So he got very upset and he said in Yiddish, he says, "You were told that you should embark. Why are you still standing here?" And she says, "Just a moment, we will go up. We will go off." And so my father handed me the film, and then he passed by examining a few other empty cars if everybody disembarked. And finally, about maybe after a minute or so, he decided that he has to make sure that we are getting off. So he returned, and this time he boarded the boxcar and said to my mother, "Why are you putting this clothing on this boy? Why are you doing this?" And my mother told him why. And he said, wird es nicht dürfen. You will not be needing it, so why are you doing? Stop doing it. And now you have to get off. And as she closed the bundle to throw it out on the platform, he turned to me and says, Ingela, wie alt bist du? He says, little boy, how old are you? And I told him, I'm 14. And he looks at me and he says, die bist nicht 14, die bist 18. You are not 14, you are 18. And I was, I don't know, I always didn't talk back to people that gave me instructions. And I said, listen, if I am 14, why should I be 18? He looked at me very seriously and put my finger on my chest. He says, Ingele, du fragt mir nicht kein Kasches. He says, young boy, here you do not ask any questions. If I tell you that you are 18, remember you're 18. Now get off. I think, of course, this moment he saved my life. And we got off from the freight car. I put the film that my father handed to me in my bosom in my shirt. I didn't have any pocket which would fit it. And we went off. And of course, this is the last time I saw my mother. I never saw her again. And we went off and we joined everybody else, the men separately and the women separately. And we joined everybody else, and now we waited around, but it was already started getting dark and it was evening, and we're still waiting now. What they imagine the reason for waiting was to have additional transports arriving. And finally, they lined us up. I don't know how many were lined up, whether hundreds or maybe thousands or more. And right now, we marched us off in a distance. And finally, after marching us off for quite a while, they finally told us to all form a single file. So we formed a single file because when they marched us off, we were usually 5 in a row. And right now, my father was in front of me and I was behind my father, and another few members from my city, from my town, were in front of my father. And here I could see what's happening in front of my father, but I could hear there was a Retzeach, or a German Malchamovis, was saying, asking a few questions. I don't know whether it was the famous Dr. Mengele, Yamach Shemoy, or whether it was some other Retzeach or other Malchamovis. But the question that my father approached was, wie alt bist du, how old are you? And kannst du arbeiten? Also, can you work? That was the second question. And he, of course, mentioned of all he had positives to all these questions. So he told him to go to the left. My turn came, and of course, I had all this clothing on me, and I was a little, for a 14-year-old, I was already quite tall. And I stretched myself out. Also, he asked me the same questions. And when it came to the question, wie alt bist du, I actually saw the young man in front of my eyes, and I said, 18, I'm 18. And he says, kannst du arbeiten? And I says, jawohl. And he motioned to me to continue on the same path as my father. Eventually, they marched us off again, and we arrived to a open barracks, like a big airplane hangar. And there they told us to undress. I finally undressed completely, including we had to give up even our watches or paper, anything. We just undressed completely. And I put on the last thing I put on was my tefillin on the pile of clothing. And I turned to my father and I says, I hope the Rebbeinu Shalom will forgive me, and you will forgive me that I cannot carry those tefillin any longer. I have to give them up. That's when the last time when I gave up my tefillin. And after a while, they started, they were prisoners who were acting as barbers with clippers, and they cut off all our hair. I tried to get some information from these so-called barbers, and I says, what is our future? What's going to happen to us? But nobody would talk. They were not allowed to talk or open their mouth. Finally, once I turned around Yingele, and he turned around the other way. And he told me, you see this table, you have all this striped clothing over there. You're going to be issued this prison clothing. And right now, your whole struggle for survival is beginning. That's all he told me. And sure enough, pretty soon they again marched us into Auschwitz itself, to Birkenau, that is, and right now they put us in a certain barrack with quite a few other people. And they did not put us immediately to work. And there was a reason for it, because in about, I think, 5, 6, or 7 days, again, they loaded us up onto empty freight cars. And this time, they, again, the train ride, we didn't know where they're taking us, but eventually we arrived to a camp called Mauthausen. Mauthausen was a terrible, terrible camp, just based for I imagine, to kill and to maim people. And there, of course, they again, they did not put us to work, but there was where they gave me and my father, they issued the number. We did not, we're not tattooed. We were issued a number on a little piece of clothing. My number was 68818, and I had to attach this to the jacket, the prison jacket. Constantly had to be there. If later on, if for some reason or other, the jacket got torn, or you had to change it, you always had to put that number on very immediately. That number was now 68818 with a red triangle. The red triangle, in my case, was indicating that this is a political prisoner, not a Jewish prisoner. But there was a reason for it, which I don't want to take up more time and go into it. So basically, this was again in Mauthausen, where I got the number. My father got the number, and after a few days, again, they kept on counting us 5, 6 times a day. We had to line up, and they kept counting us. And finally, again, in one of these occasions where they told us to line up, and my father, of course, was not with me in the same row. It happened that my father was about 5 rows in front of me, and I couldn't, it was too dangerous for me to try to change with some other prisoners and get to that line. So I waited probably like before, after they counted us, of course, they'll tell us to disembark, and from this counting group, and we got together with my father, but it did not happen this time. One of the Russians came along and put his hand five rows in front of me and said to that group and face on front of me, march away. That group was taken away and eventually ended up in another concentration camp. But unfortunately, this time I was separated from my father, and I also never saw him again. The group where I was, because of where I was standing, the group eventually they took us to loaded us up again in empty freight cars, but this time they took us to a third camp, which was called Melk, M-E-L-K, which was in Austria. And this time I felt that they're already putting us, this is going to be a place for a longer term. And it's not going to be a temporary stopover like Mauthausen. And sure enough, I was right. And eventually, as we arrived there, of course, again, as I mentioned before, we didn't have any paper, we didn't have any pencils, we didn't have any watches, we didn't have anything. We could tell time by, of course, when was sunrise and what was sunset and night and so forth. But fortunately, there was one prisoner amongst them, which was called Couple. His name was Couple. And we named him Couple der Kalendar, Couple the keeper of the calendar. Why the keeper of the calendar? Because Couple had a mind like a computer. All of us, my friends, we didn't have the energy or the need to think, is it Friday, is it Monday, is it Rosh Chodesh Elul, is it Rosh Chodesh Uv? What for? We were all going to work every day, whether it was night shifts or day shifts. So what's the difference? But nevertheless, there were some friends and some prisoners who wanted to know what day it was. There were some wanted to know what Chodesh it was, if Yom Tov is approaching or Yom Tov is not approaching. So basically, coupled was the one who gave that information and told exactly what day of the Chodesh it is, when the Chodesh is, if somebody wanted to know for some reason, or whether a holiday or a Yom Tov is approaching. I was picked and given a job. My job was to call the Spitzenträger, the carrier of the pointers. What was my job? What was the carrier of the pointers? Because most of the prisoners in my barrack, in my camp, in my shift, were working in a mountain and digging tunnels. Fortunately, this mountain was not solid stone, or it was softer material. It was pebbles and sand. And the prisoners were working constantly advancing in the tunnel with air hammers. The air hammers had a pointer, a steel pointer, which was changeable. As soon as these air hammers, the pointers got dull, they would not function probably. They had to be sharpened again. And they could not be sharpened in the tunnel itself because it required to be sharpened with a fire to make it red hot and point it and knock it and hammer it out to a point. So the blacksmith was outside of the tunnel, and my job was to pick up approximately, I usually picked up about 15 or 20 of these steel pointers. I made for myself a little carrying from wires, a little carrying some aiding effort to placing those pointers on my shoulders. And I carried them out to the blacksmith to be sharpened. My friends, I cannot stress enough the advantages that I had having access to fire. Because if some prisoner or somebody found a rotten potato or an old bone or something, and I singed it on the fire or I baked it on the fire for him, it's tasted a little differently. But also there's one thing which I remember since I was a little boy. I remember that I was told that for the machle of dysentery, I think that the refuah was coal dust, black coal dust, which was scraped off from a wooden coal. So my friends, the biggest problem in the camp at that time was, of course, the machle of dysentery. And sometimes it got so bad for certain prisoners that they couldn't control it, and they ended up in so-called revier. Revier was a so-called hospital. And they ended up in, many of them, of my friends that ended up there, I never saw again. As I mentioned before, anybody that checked in with that illness, they had never checked out. But I was thinking that maybe if I have had a talk with the blacksmith who liked me very much, and I asked him, can I take some wood, a wooden block, and put it on the fire, and I will singe it red hot, and then cool it off, and then scrape off the coal dust, and give it out to some of my friends who suffered from that machle, and maybe it will be a refuah for them. Sure enough, he allowed me to do this, but unfortunately, I didn't have any paper or anything to pack this dust in. But then he gave me an answer that there's some big leaves near in a pond next to him. I should take those leaves and pack it in those leaves. And of course, I distributed those to people that suffered from that, and many told me that it helped them. So can you imagine this number one advantage just to have advantage to this fire? And as I was carrying those pointers in and out, I want to tell you a few things about that experiences. There were many experiences, but I want to go in only to mention a few. One experience I want to mention to you is when I was emerging from one of these tunnels with my pointers to my shoulder. A friend of mine by name of not with life with somebody else, but he came to me and told me, Israel, why don't you come with me? And I want you to go with me someplace. he was the one who was working at the end of this belt. The conveyor belt was the one that was carried out all the debris that those prisoners were, as far as when they are advancing into the tunnel, there were prisoners who shoveled that debris on that belt, and that belt was constantly moving, and it was they every time as they advanced in the tunnel, the prisoners advanced, they also lengthened that conveyor belt, and the conveyor belt carried out debris and poured it into little steel cars. Weber, my friend, who was working at the end of this line of the conveyor belt, which he was the only one working over there. His job was to, if any of this debris fell off from the conveyor belt at the end, he had to put it also in one of those little steel cars. And he says, I'm taking you to the end, to the steel car, but we cannot walk. We cannot walk upright because they will see you. You are not supposed to be there. You will have to crawl. So I crawled, schlepping of course, my steel pointers with me. And I was thinking, Weber, you must have found something to eat, and you hid it in one of those broken down steel cards. Oi, you will share it with me, won't you? And he says, we'll be there very soon. And he says, okay, you see that broken down steel card? It's empty, and we will crawl in there. And I says, oh, that was a good place to hide. What did you find? What did you hide over there, Weber? And he says, let's get in. And I got in there, and it was, of course, a very hot day. And I relaxed, and I felt the coolness of the place. And I looked up, and I see there is on top of that broken down steel card, there is twigs of branches and so forth. And I said to Weber, you know, it almost looks like a sukkah. And he says, Sulek, this doesn't look like a sukkah. It is a sukkah. And I says, it is a sukkah. I says, why did you slap me? Do you have something to eat in the sukkah? He says, no, unfortunately, I have nothing to eat, but I'll tell you, we'll make a brucha. We'll make a brucha together, la yeshe besukkah, and we made both a brucha, the brucha la yeshe besukkah. And I burst out crying, and I said, Weber, I remember sukkahs, we had all these goodies, all these wonderful things that my mother had brought into the sukkah, some wonderful cake and fish and all the macholim who were so good. And we started remembering about the time we spent sukkahs at home. And after a while, I said, I have to go back to the blacksmith. I have to leave. And of course, Weber thanked me for accompanying him to this and make this brocha. And I can tell you right now that I've had great. Weber was not a Rav. He was a shoe salesman. That I remember him as a little boy from home. And I remember, but nevertheless, I had the tremendous admiration for Weber. Why? Not because he built the sukkah under these circumstances, not because he was Mekayim that mitzvah under the circumstances, but I knew as long as he had the plan to carry out that particular mitzvah, that he is going to survive, he's going to live. I was afraid what happened to him afterwards. What will happen to him after he has unless he will assume for himself another mitzvah, but I don't know. And many people many other Kedoshim who tried to carry out my Rabbi one or two mitzvahs, I knew that they are going to survive because the urge to be Mekayim that mitzvah was so greater than anything else. But I was afraid once that mitzvah was completed, whether they will still have the energy and the will to fight for survival. Many times they came over to me and said, Srulik, why are you urging us to hold out and to go on? And I said, look here, I said, I can only tell you one thing, I'm not a Navi. Rabbeinu Shloim is not communing with me, not giving me any basko. But I can tell you one thing, that also you should know that there is a war going on. And while we were already imprisoned, the war was almost coming to an end. I'm sure that these Raschim knew that they were losing the war because since Stalingrad, I think, they already knew that the end is coming. But nevertheless, I said, who knows? Maybe if you will just if you have the will to survive, you will fight for it. Maybe we will survive. And I tried to encourage a lot of people that gave up hope. They told me, look at the back of your seat, they piled, we're all going to end up over there. And I says, please have some faith, have some betoken. The Rebbeinu Shalom has listed me many. He is hidden from us, but nevertheless, he's still there. And maybe he will help us to survive. And sure enough, after a while, as the Russians were approaching our camp from the east, they decided that we cannot be liberated. So they divided the camp in many different groups in many different ways, transported us to a fourth concentration camp called Ebensee. Ebensee was located in the Alps of the Austrian Linz, Austrian area. Very, very beautiful area, but also very cold and very snowy. And of course, I happened to be in a transport where they transported us through the Danube with a ship to Linz, which is a city in not far from Ebensee in Austria, because the Danube passes by there. And from there, they marched us by foot for about, I don't know many, 2 days, 3 days. They marched us to Ebensee, to their fourth camp. All I know is that it started off many, many hundreds or maybe even a few thousand. But the group that arrived to Ebensee after that march, I think did not count more than 600 or 700 from a few thousand. So many never died on the way, which took place in many different situations where they emptied out concentration camps because the Allies were approaching, and they marched them off to different. They used different methods to reduce let's say, these prisoner population. But we arrived to Ebensee, and then Ebensee, again, we were not appointed to do any labor. This time only we were sitting around for a few days or maybe a week or so, but at the same time, we also did not get the regular ration of so-called bread that we had to divide among 7 or 8 people or 6 people. So this time we didn't get anything, and the hunger was terrible. Hunger, our lice were eating us up alive. So suddenly I looked up one morning, I looked up and I see that the towers, the guard towers surrounding the camp of Ebensee, usually were always conducted, or they were always with German soldiers with machine guns. And I look at my friends and I say, my friends, come and see. I look at those guardhouses. There is no more German Roschim with machine guns over there. I see some civilians standing there with white armbands. This, of course, gave us the clue that liberation is approaching. My friend, liberation was a very, very important and very significant time. I can speak about liberation for hours, but of course, I'm not going to speak for hours about liberation, but I want to touch a few points about the time of liberation. As we were standing liberated now, and we heard, I was standing with my group of my friends, my age. We were standing at the gate, actually, where we used to go in and out from the camp of Ebensee. And I was standing there, and I heard the rumble of some heavy equipment. And sure enough, pretty soon I saw a tank approaching, tank with a white star on it, and another tank after that, and a jeep with officers on that coming after. And I even did not move. My friends tell me, listen, this tank is moving into the camp. Why don't you move? I said, no. I said, I'm standing right here. I mean, if he wants to, if I want to be end, my life should be ended going over by American tanks, so be it. Anyhow, the tank stopped in front of me, but they committed a very big mistake, my friends. But they did. The tank hood opened a while, and they started throwing out some cigarettes and crackers and chocolate. And as the prisoners all suddenly were rushing towards it, and each one tried to grab something. Many tried to grab something from other prisoners and so forth. Unfortunately, many of them didn't get up again because they were trampled or, or they were suffocated. Anyhow, finally, the Americans saw immediately that the big mistake, so they stopped doing it. But nevertheless, the officers came up from their perch on the jeeps, and they started talking to us in English or German, whatever. They asked us, is there anybody who can interpret so forth what they're saying? And the only thing that we were shouting is food, food, food. That was the only thing that was in our minds. We had to have some food, otherwise we will collapse right then and there. They explained to us that there is a army field kitchen approaching, and they will bring in the kitchen to the camp, to the Pelplatz, which is the place where they used to constantly count us. It was an empty spot in the camp itself. And they, sure enough, one of these field kitchens approached very soon, and they started, I could smell, they started cooking on it, and they started cooking some rice with fat bacon and so forth, a concussion like that. And I turned to my friends and I says, look here, I says, I even the smell bothers me, it makes me nauseous. I says, as much as I would sell, you and me, all of us would sell our lives for a loaf of bread. If somebody would come up at this moment and say, Sulek, here is a loaf of bread. You can eat as much as you want, but you will be punished, or you'll be shot in the morning or hanged in the morning. I would simply make the deal without any question. My friends would do the same thing. So not to line up and get some of that concussion was a great terche on a great something which we decided to do. And sure enough, as people lined up, prisoners lined up, and there were prisoners of all different nationalities, not only Jews. They lined up to take that concussion, and they were still in their mouth, but they collapsed. Many collapsed and died right then and there because their digestive system, our digestive system, was so shrunk that anything that expanded in the digestive system is just like exploded, and the system, the person couldn't take it. And as I said to I encouraged my friend, please, maybe we're liberated. They'll give us some. They realized what they were doing was wrong, and finally they told us that there is another field kitchen approaching, and they will give us now powdered milk and farina and oatmeal, which they said their doctors admitted that it would probably our digestive system would be able to tolerate. But as this was going on, I said to my friends, I see, I would say about maybe 150 or 200 feet away, a distance away, I see another line lined up, and I see my friends from my barrack are there. These are that I have worked with. Let's see what's going on over there. Why are they lined up? What are they giving away over there? Maybe they're giving away something that we can tolerate. So I convinced them, and we approached the other line. As we approached the other line, on a distance, I could already see that the Chusterav Zal was standing there with a Teres Shaliat, which was found in one of the broken down, I would say, broken down railroad cars that brought in cement bags for a group that was working with cement. And I would say one of the prisoners found a shaliat, a torn Teres Shaliat, amongst these cement bags, and he managed to smuggle that shaliat into the camp itself, even though we all had a little inkling about what happened, about the tremendous treasure that was found with shaliat and about those cement bags, but nobody wanted to really discuss it, because if it ever is discovered, they'll want to know who knew about it, and we would all be in great serious problems, face serious problems, because we knew about this shaliat. But when I approached this line, this torn in Shel Yad was held by the Chisteruf, Rabbi Sheila Grimwald, and he, and people, the prisoners were approaching, instead of filling their stomachs with this concussion of food that the system couldn't tolerate. Everybody slowly approached and took the shalyat close to the heart and held it to the heart and made a brucha sheniach mitzvahs film. And my turn came and I burst out crying and I said to Rav Glumer, I said to him, you know, this is the last thing, when I was standing naked, this is the last thing that I had to put on. And I asked Mechilas for my father, Rabbi Shloim, for not able to hold on to them any longer. And right now, this is the first thing that comes in my hand at the time of liberation, before I even had something in our stomach, before I even ate something. So, but that was very emotional. My friends, I just want to mention one thing, that my father was a very, very smart person. And I also a bentoyer and so forth. And when he told me, like, hold on to the film, I'm sure he didn't mean to hold on to the film physically. He knew that there's not any possibility to really carry that out. But he meant, I'm sure that he meant, hold on to film shibarosh, as the Gemara says. Don't say that, say film is something that will protect us from the Raskin and so forth. Film doesn't say film shal rosh. It tells film shibarosh. The film that are in your head. These are if you will continue, and if you will hold on to the what film represent the kedusha of film and the Messiah that was given over when you got to. If you will hold on to this, then this is something that will give you a future. My friend, he was so right. I'll tell you, I just want to touch a few more minutes on the time of liberation, as I said before, which was so important. Why? Because we already, at the time of liberation, we already had something in our stomachs. The pains of hunger were already stilled. And now we started taking, I say we, is all the prisoners that were the Sheres Apleta, the remnants of this terrible churban. They were standing there liberated. We all now had something in our stomachs to still the hunger. So we started taking a little din cheshbon, makara. What happened? Where is my father? Where is my mother? Where is my brother? Where is my sister? Everybody started to think, where am I going to go from here? What is going to be my future? And I would say, and this was the thoughts that I went through. It was like almost like in Har Sinai. My friends, compare it to the time of Har Sinai, when we were standing over there, and again in right time we were standing liberated under black clouds, thinking what is going to be our future and what is going to happen to us. And as I was, and people were saying, many were saying, you know, I'm a good Jew. I am not going to kill. I'm not going to rob. But I don't need any of these mitzvahs. I don't need Torah Shebal Peh. I don't need something with the Rabbonim or make gezeiros or give a make laws, chukim and shputim. I will be a good Jew, but I don't believe in all this. There are some others, Rabbi Shloim, who said, unfortunately, less din, less dying. There's no God. I can understand their ordering and their saying. I could understand it too. But we were standing a group liberated who still remembered this from our parents and grandparents, the Messiah. And fortunately, the Rebbeinu Shloim sent us Shaluchim, like the Klosenburger Rebbe's Chisa Yugadalaini, I think his name was, I'll remember his name in a minute. And he told us, Rabbi Isai, we have no choice. We have to go back to our Messiah. We have to go back to our mitzvahs, whether it's Torah Shebeksaf and Torah Shebal Peh. As I said, I believe, Belfia Nias Dati, I was comparing this situation to Matan Torah, when some people, we said, Rabbi was held the mountain over us, kechugas, like a barrel. Why? We already said Nasi ben Ishma. So, but nevertheless, we said Nasi ben Ishma, but we wanted to accept Torah shebeksav, but not Torah shebal peh. Again, I compare this to this moment of liberation when some people says, yes, I'll be a good Jew, but I don't want all this. It says, right now, they said us like the Klosenberger Rebbe, and also from the Rav from Cincinnati, and also the Chisterov and so forth. And they told us, Rabboisai, we have no choice, but we have to go back to our Masorah that our parents and our teachers and our Rebbe told us. Otherwise, there will be no future. There will be nobody left. Sham tiye kibaraschem, just like the Rebbeinu Shalom said, if you don't accept the Torah, both Torah Shebektav and the Torah Shebal Peh, Sham tiye kibaraschem, there, where in Auschwitz, Majdanek, and so forth, that will be the end of you. So fortunately, these Rabbunim and these Shalichim that were sent were also Shalichim from Eretz Yisrael, who were also present at the time of liberation. And they all encouraged us and says, you have to go back to the Masorah of your grandparents. Otherwise, I think that the Raschem will be glorious in Sham Tiyeh K'Baraschem. Thank you very much for all of you who attended. I would like to ask you one more minute. First of all, I would like to ask, I usually have questions and answers. If there is there time for questions and answers?
Yes, there definitely is.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. There is actually a
I would like, before I get to Q&A, I would like to say, like I usually do with the end of Keil Mura Rachman, when I speak about the Kedushim Atorim that never perished in the Churban Europe. So I would give me another minute to listen to me when I am going to recite this Haskaras Neshumas in their behalf. Ein Rachmim Shoichen Bem Roibim Am Tzayim Anucha Nechoinu Al Kamfi Ashchinu B'Malas Kedoshim Atorim Kezoyer Hurikiyam Asirim Es Nishbisayim Shel Mayas Riboy Yisruel Zukein Benar Anushim Benushim Betaf Shenehergu Al Kiddush Hashem Nishchitu V'Nechenku V'Nisrafu Leifer Al Yedei HaTzoyrim HaGermanim Yemach Shemon Beineim Arzei Halbunoin Adirei HaToyru Kedoshim Atoyrim Rushai Yeshivois B'Salmi Deihoin Tinoikos Yisruel Shloi Ta'amu Tam Cheit V'Tzadikei Oilam Rabuna Yisruelem Ki Loisayem Ki Hilois HaKodesh Shebasru Nafshama Kedishas Hashem V'chein B'yad Kroiveinu Shenispu B'Soicham Iskreim Eloheinu L'Toivu Im Shar Tzadikei Oilam V'yinkoim Nikmas Dam Abudav Hashucher Kakuser B'Soiras Moishe Ish Elohim Hadini Goyim Amoy Kidam Abudav Yikoim V'dukam Yushev V'tzura V'chiper Adus Soyamoy V'yahu Yedei Avodeichu Anbiyem Kusev Leiber V'nekaisi Dumam Lo Nekaisi V'adoidoi Shoichein B'tzion V'chisba Kodesh Neima Lumo Yoimru Agoyim Ayeloheim Yehuda Bagoyim Leidenu Nikmas Dam Avodeichu Hashufer Hidav Sham Tzerura B'tzroira Chayim Lachyo Yisam Zchias Amazim Im kol meisei amchu Yisruel berachmim Ushlach lunu es Mashiach tzedkeinu Libdoi soisunu miguloiseinu V'kapseinu yachad Mi'arba kamfois hures le'artseinu V'niskei legula shleimu b'mheiru umain. Thank you, Rabbi Liu, for inviting me and for everybody that took the time to listen to me. And if they feel there's time for a few questions and answers, I'll be very glad to answer any question.
Yes, Mr. Starck. Thank you so much. What a story, and you've certainly fulfilled the mitzvahs, Chiras Amalek. There is a question about if there were other young boys, of young teens with you, and if you are still in contact with any of them.
Yes, I will tell you, unfortunately, again, as I mentioned, the situation of Poiches Behoilich. Never there are fewer and fewer of us remaining who still experience this in person. And they were in Chicago. There were three other friends that were in the camp with me. I'm going back to Chicago, and this was Rabbi Yisrael Farkash that many of you have known and remember. Rabbi Yisrael Farkash, he was actually a Talmud in Pressburg, and also had Jack Rice, Yankee Rice, who was a Yedid Nefesh of mine. He was one of the one who was here in Chicago. Nebuch also is lifted already, and there is also Zalek Spun, who is still here, and hopefully will have good health and stay with us. And that's but there are a few others who moved to other cities and so forth that I was in touch with here and there. But imagine they're long gone and so forth. So obviously we have to be thankful for whoever is still the Rebbeinu Shalom has given health in the years.
That man who suggested that you say you were 18, did you ever see him again? Did you ever maintain any further contact with him?
Who are you referring to?
The man who told you when you arrived to say that you're 18 years old.
I didn't know his name. I never knew who he was. All I knew that he was approximately a year, 20 or 21 years old. He was working there in a shift like many others that later on I found out who were working there, and it was that commando or that group had a certain name. They always gave him a certain name. Many, of course, unfortunately, they worked at the crematorium where they really finished off all those bodies. Nevertheless, they were working there for a few months, and after that, they also killed them, so they should not be witnesses left of what they have witnessed. So basically, all I know is that how approximately how old he was. I never know his name, and I will always remember that he is the one who saved my life at the arrival of Auschwitz.
Eliyahu Hanavi of his time. Was there ever a time that you can share with us where you thought that you weren't going to survive, and what gave you the strength, the bitachon, the strength, the koyach to keep going?
It's a question that I am being asked often. What gave me the strength to keep going is several things. Number one, betuchen b'Hashem. I had betuchen b'Hashem. I was raised that way. There was the Messiah for my parents and so forth. And I, even under those circumstances, as I said, I mentioned to you before that somebody told me why I am encouraging them to fight to stay alive. And I told them that because all I know is, as I said, I'm not a Navi, but I know one thing, that we have to believe. If you believe in the Betuch in the Rebbeinu Shalom, that certainly there was Nister, he was hidden from us while all this took place, but nevertheless he's still around and he will return to us. If you have the Betuchen that he will return to us, then you don't have to give up. You have something to fight for, something to stay alive for. And I try to encourage this, and this is the emunah that I had as something that saved my life. And I have also not only believed myself and rested on this emunah, gave me a lot of inner feeling, inner peace, and inner support, but also try to encourage others also to go in the same way. And the other thing is that we knew, as I remember when I, even although I was 14 years old, but I was very much aware of what was going on in the world. I knew that already at that time in 1944, in beginning after Pesach, the war, the terrible war that was spreading all over Europe, and the occupation that the Germans did in Poland, and what they did in Poland and in Russia and so forth. And naturally, right now they were fighting eventually on their own soil, that the war is not going to last very long. But the question is, are we going to last that long? And I try to encourage several ways, whether have a little bit talking and so forth. Or, so I said, if somebody had the plan to perform a mitzvah, then they had a reason to fight for his life. So I imagine the fact that we had the emunah, that I had the emunah, that kept me going, and I am Baruch Hashem now here, and the Rebbeinu Shalom has given me years and health, so I can speak about these experiences.
Can you speak a little bit about how, after liberation, you came to the United States? How did you come
I'm
to
sorry,
Chicago?
I didn't hear that question.
How did you? Can you speak a little bit about how, after liberation, you came to the United States? How you made it to Chicago?
Yeah,
A little bit of
I
your
will talk
story here in
about it.
Chicago.
This is also a long history. I think I have published a book about 10 years ago called Boy Named 68818. The book is available by Boicher's Forum, I imagine, and also Amazon, if anybody is interested. There I'm going into more detail about the experiences of after liberation. But I'm just going to tell you that my plan was not to come to America. Absolutely not. I was very much on fire that our place is now Eretz Yisrael, and by hook or by crook, we have to get there. Even though, you know, there was unfortunately, there was very little affidavits or permission given for people or these survivors to come in legally. But there was a tremendous movement of Aliyah Bet. It's called the Aliyah, which is not the legal way of getting into Israel. You all are familiar with one of the stories with all of the ships that were kept in Cyprus by the English and so forth. So that was my plan. But I joined a religious kibbutz in a DP camp after the war, whereby they promised me that I am going to be shipped off to Eretz Yisrael on Aliyah Beit very soon. And of course, I worked for that, and I believed in that. But nevertheless, as time moved on, and maybe even a year moved on or more, I see that they constantly postponed my getting to a legal Aliyah Beit to Eretz Yisrael. And without my knowledge, my sisters, who also Baruch Hashem survived, and they were in a different DP camp, and one time they saw an announcement that any boy that survived the war at the age of between 15 and 18 can register to go to America and get affidavits from. We got affidavits to go to America from the wife of President Roosevelt at that time, which was Mrs. Roosevelt, gave out about 500, I believe, 500 affidavits for these survivors. And they registered me without asking me, without my knowledge. They put my name on, my birth date, and so forth, and my address. I suddenly received a letter that I have 3 days to report to Bremerhaven to go to America. And I got that letter again, and almost in a time like we were standing at Survival, which I described in Black Clouds. I was constantly postponed for my trip to go to Aliyah Beit, and I was so disgusted. I was in such pain that I said, okay, I'm leaving regardless, because it seems to me that there is no end for my waiting. And I reported at the Bremerhaven to the ship to go to America, and which was, I would say, about maybe in August or September at that time of the year in 1947. And I arrived in America in New York in 1947, also a few weeks later.
You mentioned about your sisters, and thank God that they survived. And you mentioned also about a sister who had passed away before the war. Is there anything else you can tell us about them?
Well, yes, I will tell you about, first of all, about a sister that passed away before the war. As I said, my father was a Belzer Choset, and my mother, Aliyah Sholem, she had also tremendous emunas chachumim. She had tremendous emuna in the chachumim. She had her own poisek. My father, of course, had the Belzer Shitta. My mother had her poisek, was Rab Yossel as the Choiver. There was Rab Yossel as the Choiver in Munkach. He was, of course, from the Choiver Geise. And he was my mother's poisek and my mother's rabbi. Many times I imagine in those terrible days when we were already suffering under the Hungarian regime and were afraid that they should not take us away from home as ideas were coming through, that many places they also even in Hungary, anybody that was born in Poland or had a Upstam or he was his parents came from there, they transported out us while we were still being able to go to sleep our own beds at night. And I said, so my sisters, so my mother once took me, said, Strulik, come with me to see, I'm going to see Rabbi Yossele, the Rebbe. So I must have been at least around 11, I believe either 11 or 12 years old. And she took me along, and I remember coming in to the Rebbe, Rabbi Yossele, the Shoiver. We sat down, and my mother poured her heart out about the terrible situation that is going on and so forth. And we also have a child in our home who never was not a healthy child. She was handicapped. She was like a rag doll. She had no muscle tone and so forth. And she said, Rebbe, what are we going to do with the child if they take us away from home? How are we going to manage? And she cried her heart out. And I was listening, and the Rebbe of the Shoiver Rebbe, as he said, the lane, Rabbi Moshe said, ich will ihr sollt daheim gehen. I want you should go home and have betuchen, Rabbi Shalom will help you, that Miriam was her name, Miriam will have a refuah shalema. And as we left the Rebbe, we left the Shoiver, Rabbi Yossele, and my mother took my hand, and for a while we walked quietly together. And after a while, she told Strulik, you're very restless. Something is bothering you. Tell me, what is bothering you? Tell me what's on your mind. And I told her, I says, Mama, I couldn't understand. The Rebbe, I heard him say, Mariam should have a refuah shalema. I says, how is that possible? She's already 18 years old, and you're putting her to bed, and we are feeding her, and we are dressing her, and we are taking care of her. She doesn't speak. She just makes certain noises. How is this possible that she's going to have a refuah shalema? And she pressed my hand, and she says, Strulik, you know, we do not ask any shilas. When a Rebbe tells us something, we have to have betuchen that she will have a refuah shalema. And I will tell you, my friends, it's unbelievable, but 2 nights later, I wake up in the morning and I see my sisters crying after we came back from the Rebbe, and my sister's crying, and I said, why are you crying? She says, Maribel didn't wake up. Maribel passed away. So I'm telling you, find, you know, the thoughts that came to me, you understand. Also, I must tell you that when I said my 2 sisters went out the back window, one of my older sisters, her name was Gittel, she told to the younger one, you know, we are running away, but I don't know, we'll probably never come back to this place. Why don't you go back into the house through the window that it came out of, and bring me my father's becher, and bring me my mother's candlestick and some of the jewelry that she owned, and I will dig a hole right here under this window, and I will bury it. I didn't know about it, and my parents didn't know about it. And after, thank God that they also were liberated, and they also finally showed up, as everybody else decided that the only way to find out if my parents or my uncle or my brother or my sister survived is the only way to go back home, to try somehow to navigate back home, which was very difficult after the war, because there was no other communication, there was no telephones and so forth. So in order for somebody to find out who survived from the family, had to go back home to the birthplace. And so did I, and eventually my sisters arrived. And of course, at that time, for the first time I heard that they saved some of these hefses of Kedisha, like the candlesticks and the becher, which I, Baruch Hashem, use every Shabbos and every Yom Tov, and the brisn for my grandchildren. And Halavai, I think we should continue to do so.
Wow, amazing, beautiful, so truly beautiful. I'm putting
Thank
here.
You very much. So
Thank
in
you.
Case there's no more questions, I would like to wish you all a gute Woche and a gesunte Woche. And again, Rabbi Shua, I want to say to any of you who will listen to me, if you have any other question that pops into your mind, I'm always available. You have my telephone is listed in the regular Chicago listing, and there you'll find it. And I don't mind if you call me and say, Shulek, something like this popped into my mind after reading your book or after I heard you speak. Can you tell me about this? I'll be very happy to answer your questions. Again, a gute Woche and a gesundte Woche. And thank you, Rabbi Liu. And we should hear, Mr. Shem, this whole machle that the dear suffering today should end and go back to our normal life.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you very much.
The Amazon link to Rabbi Yisrael's book here in the chat. You can click on it and follow from there. We want to thank you so much. And David should bless you with Arichas Yomim and Nachas and Kinder and Kindskinder. Ad Ein Sof.
I must tell you that Rabbi Yisrael, I don't know, I don't have the count, but Rabbi Yisrael granted me already at least, I think, 50 grandchildren and about maybe 25 great-grandchildren.
Oh, my, beautiful.
So this is the biggest nekoma that I could have in this Roshchem and for the time but they have been.
True. Thank you to everyone for joining. Thank you for Rabbi Rappaport for arranging, and thank you. Nachas and gesundte Woche.
Amen. A gesundte Woche and a gute Woche.
I did record this, so if somebody wants a copy, send me an email, and I will be able to make it available.
Thank you very much.
Rabbi, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Yeah. Are you related to the famous entertainment family Starck? S-T-O-R-C-H?
No, my name here in Chicago reverted to Starck, C-K, but my name actually is Storch, S-T-O-R-C-H.
Yes.
The K is pronounced in Europe as Ch. Here it is Ch. So anyway, it was people were always didn't know how to pronounce my last name because it was C-H. So eventually became Starck. So I did not never corrected it. It is Starck. But my name was Storch, S-T-O-R-C-H at home. And now these Storcks that I heard that they're in the entertainment business or whatever it is, they're not no relations of mine.
Because he told me his name was also Starck, or it became Starck. But for show business, he went back to Storch. He's a director. He was a famous actor. He had a television show, Larry Storch.
What is his first name, Larry?
It was Lawrence Storch, yeah. And then he's got a brother, Arthur, who's a director. And,
no, absolutely. I have never been contacted by him to even try to trace whether there's any relation there. So I did hear the name of what you mentioned, but I never he never contacted me and never contacted him. So, but I say, as far as I know, no relation. Okay. So thank you again for everybody that joined us. And as I said before, when you speak, you can only say so much. You can only give so much over of something that I experienced, not everything that I experienced. So if you really want to know more of every thing that I went through, whatever I experienced, I maybe ask some friends who already have the book that I would load it to you, so you don't have to buy it. I am not trying to sell my books because I don't make a living from it, or I don't get any hanoah from it. But nevertheless, it's part of zichron, part of remembering, and I think that it will help also, especially your children and grandchildren. They all tell me when they read it, they're very interested in things that went on in those days and what happened to those Kedoshim. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much. I posted a link to the book in the chat. We want to thank Rabbi Yisrael, sei gesund und stark, and thank you.
Call to everybody.